Well, hello everybody. This is Earl Mack coming to you with Car Chat, as my sister Queen Cookie would say, Car Chat. Hey, I'm on my way back to Toledo from Middletown, New York, where I spent a couple of days with my extended family there. I attended the final services of my godfather, Pop Patrick. We're gonna miss you, Pop, for sure. And so I'm headed back home now. Great day for travel too. Really great day for travel. And during my travels to New York and then on the return, and you have time to sit back and think about all the stuff that's going on. We are having a difficult time here, locally and around the country, involving the latest death of another black man by police officer, George Floyd. And we sit back a lot of times and wonder, when is it going to stop? I don't know, but we got to do something. I know when I seen that video, when a friend of mine sent it to me that evening, I was so taken by it. I was so angry, as I'm sure a lot of people around this country were, and around the world, really, of what we saw. Mr. Floyd's life just by seconds, for some 8+ minutes, just snuffed out. And so there's been a lot of talk about that. I've had friends talk to me about it, ask me questions, both black and white. And they even talked about our program that the Buffalo Soldiers has, which is What to Do and Stop by Police. And mind you, that program is virtually says comply now, complain later, because you will not win on the street. But that program doesn't work all the time, for sure. And so that's some of the things when they ask me, well, what if that program doesn't work? All I can say is that you continue to comply. However, this latest death is just really has been with me, and it's hard for me to shake it. It really is. Just watching that video, and it just sticks with me as to the conduct of the officer that murdered him, and then the conduct of the other 3 officers that allowed that murder to take place. And I know a lot of times I have friends, law enforcement colleagues, especially law enforcement colleagues, some of them that say, Earl, we are quick sometimes to rush to judgment without having all of the evidence in and knowing what really happened. Well, you can say that if you want to, but I don't think I'm quick to rush to judgment on this one at all. It was an actual murder, an execution, as I call it. However, what do we do, man, to increase positive relationships between the African American black community, black males in particular, and our police officers? In the last month and a half or so, we've seen several black males and a black female killed by police. One lady was at home when plainclothes officers came to the home, and I don't know if they had a knock warrant, or a no-knock warrant or not, but if they had a no-knock warrant, when they came into that home, the husband was concerned of a break-in. He got his firearm, and there was exchange of fire, and the wife was hit 8 times and died, black female. What do we do about all this? We have protests that's going on, lots of protests. And by the way, the officers that were involved in Mr. Floyd's death, it was a diverse of officers. One of the officers was black. An officer that's 26 years old. He came on the job not too long ago, and we still have the death of another black man. The one officer that actually done the murder, he's a training officer. From my understanding, one or two of the officers there were trained by him, or at least they attended some training class of his. So when we talk about officers, we talk about how do we resolve this issue between black males and police officers, between the black community and police officers. That's a hell of a question. And how do you do that? I mean, we talk about we need more black officers in the black community to police the black community instead of so many white officers. Well, again, you see here is a black officer that was involved in the death of Mr. Floyd. We need more training. The training officer involved in the death of Mr. Floyd. So it goes way beyond that. It goes to, we talk about the institutionalized racism that's in policing. And how do you deal with that? It's been years and years of institutionalized racism. And how do you deal with institutionalized racism? We see where organizations are coming up with making recommendations as to how to increase the positive relationships between police and community. And I don't know really what's going to work other than we need to keep talking to each other. No matter how you feel about this situation, no matter how you feel about relationships between the black community and police officers, we need to keep that dialogue going. Because I need to hear what you have to say. You need to hear what I have to say. A lot of times we say, whites need to put themselves in the place of a black man or someone that is black. And I don't know how possible that is unless you really live as a black person. You still don't know. You can only hear what we say. But I could tell you this, even as a child going down south, and we've done a lot of travel down there. 7 years old, I was 8, 9, 10 years old. There were always signs that you would see that would say no colors allowed, or colored restrooms are here. You couldn't use restrooms that were used by whites. I even had incidences where when the bus pulled up at a restaurant, we couldn't go inside because of our color. The food was ordered and it was brought to the door, paid for, and then we ate on the bus, even using the restroom. I have a funny thing I talk about sometimes. I even talked with some white friends of mine last week, and I said, man, I really get a kick out of when I go into the restroom now and stand next to a white guy and we both are doing our business. There was a time we couldn't do that. And some people look at me and go like, man, wow, it's kind of funny. But it's true. There was a time when blacks couldn't walk on the sidewalk. If a white was on the sidewalk, we had to get off the sidewalk and let them pass. If not, you get the hell beat out of you, if not even lynched. And that's happened several times. When I watched my grandfather and great-grandfather, that I had the opportunity to know and see, when they talk to whites, they talk with their head down, always with their head down. I was told one time, never look in a white person's face. You talking about institutionalized racism, that's institutionalized racism, because those attitudes and behaviors carried on through the years. Whites taught their children that, we taught our children what I just said, not to look in a white person's face. As a matter of fact, on Fred Lefevre's show not too long ago, a gentleman was kind of talking about blacks not looking into the face of white police officers, because one of our radio personalities, a black radio personality, and I hope he doesn't mind me using his name, Chuck, he had an experience at 20 years old where he was pulled over by police officers and pulled out of his vehicle. They were looking for dope, never found any. When they turned his back to the officers, and the officers said, "Don't turn around, don't look in my face." And so this gentleman that came on to then kind of challenge what Mack said, Charlie Mack it is, what Mack said. He says, "Well, you have no business looking into a police officer's face." I said, "What kind of?" I use a stronger word than this, but what kind of shiggity is that? Don't look in a police officer's face. And this was white and black. Who the hell you think we are nowadays that you tell me I can't look in a police officer's face? And I've been a police officer, law enforcement, for 39 years. Was once the acting deputy director of enforcement operations for the liquor, food stamp, and tobacco enforcement, the Ohio Department of Liquor Control, and then under the Ohio Department of Public Safety. I was the agent in charge of enforcement operations in Northwest Ohio, and at the end of that career, I was appointed deputy director of Ohio Homeland Security. So I have a lot of experience as a police officer, and even as a police officer, you know, I still deal with racist comments and racist actions towards me until somebody find out I'm a police officer, and then the attitude changes. So I understand conflicts between officers and citizens. Hell, we had to deal with some of the worst attitudes in liquor enforcement that you can ever deal with, and that was, you know, policing liquor permit establishments. When people get intoxicated, it is tough to handle them, and especially if you have to arrest them, and some of those arrests were physical arrests. And early on, I learned how to treat people with respect. And there's a lot of people that will tell you today that when Earl Mack walked into our establishment, regardless if they were arrested or not, I treated them all with respect. And so how do we deal with that today? You know, we talk about training of officers. I am so disappointed to see that, you know, the training budget of our police departments has been cut so much. I always say with our agents is that you have a law enforcement officer that, you know, that carries the power that he or she can take your life. They carry firearms around it, you know, on the job as part of their tool. So we need supervision more so than about any profession out there, simply because of what we do and the powers that were given us by the legislators and citizens, really. I always say this too, and I apologize for jumping around. Man, there's so much on my mind about this incident. I always say, you know, we don't teach police officers much anymore, and we don't reinforce that training if you do, that police officers are servants. They're servants of that community. And I see so many times police officers develop the attitude of we against you. That should never be, because that's what causes some of these problems. Again, police officers are servants of that community, and that's the way it should be. I just said the other day, who really is the employer of government, of police officers? It's that citizens. The citizens are our employers because they are the ones that approve your budget. If a tax bill goes up to be voted on, we have to vote for that bill to approve it or disapprove it. And what if citizens start, you know, putting on the ballot to reduce police pay and vote on that. And so I always say citizens are our employers, and we need to treat them with the utmost, regardless if they're being arrested or whatever the conflict is. But back to training. As I said earlier, one of the main officers that took Mr. Floyd's life was a training officer. And so what do we look at? Man, you have to look at not only the behaviors, is the psychological mindset of a person. That's a police officer. One of the things that police officers do year in and year out, day in and day out, they have to deal with all kinds of problems. Sometimes they have to act as a father that comes into the home because of an unruly child. They go to domestic violences where they have to deal with that. They deal with with patrol in our streets, whether it's patrolling a neighborhood that have shootings in it, all kinds of issues that they have to deal with daily. They have to deal with people that get murdered. They have to investigate that. They have to respond to those things. There's so much police officers have to deal with, and that's just a drop in the bucket what they have to deal with. They're human like anybody else. I know one thing in undercover work, most agencies, if you put an officer undercover for a number of years, you have to bring that officer out from undercover, or they become, so a lot of times they become that person that they've targeted to work, or they have become that environment if you don't pull them out and chill them out. About the best thing I can say. Police officers need to, in my opinion, they need to have psychological testing at least yearly, going to sit down and talk with a mental health expert, and so that if there's issues, we can deal with that right away. And some of these problems you'll see may not happen. Now that has a lot to do with racism, though, because if a police officer comes on the job with a preconceived notion of a particular race, of a particular ethnic community that is negative, how do you change that? Because a lot of these police officers don't live in the community. Hell, we have police officers that don't even live in the city of Toledo because of court cases that they can live about anywhere that they want to live. So if you never live in the community that you police, how committed are you to that community? And that's not all officers. You hear us always say, the bad ones are just a very few, so many officers that do a wonderful job out here. And that's about right. If you look at probably 90% of the officers that do, they do a good job for our community. They risk their lives every day for our community. They put their lives in front of people they don't even know. But unfortunately, you have those very few officers that make it bad for everybody. But I look at the ones that we call good officers. We all know an officer that sometimes go over the edge, that sometimes do those things that are not in accordance with policy, involving police conduct. They're in violation of our oath we take, but you never say anything. And silence is just as bad. I know I talked to police officers, black police officers, and they would say, Earl, if we were to say something, these are our backup out there. They may not want to come back you up. They're afraid of being ostracized and talking bad about, and so then they just go along with things. And I've seen several incidences, video-wise, where white officers are not consistent with policy, good conduct policies as they confront citizens, particularly black citizens. But there's black officers there that don't say nothing about it, never say anything. They just stand off to the side. I even watched a video once where where some officers that were in the gang unit had rode upon this house. There's a young lady standing outside in her front yard, and they just sat in the car and just stared at her, just sat there as an intimidation kind of thing. And she then looked at them and said, "What the F are you looking at?" And they said, "We're effing looking at you." Oh, that's an instant discipline of those officers. I don't care what the citizens say to you. That is uncalled for an officer to answer back. And it was uncalled for them to sit there and watch her. And to make a long story short, what ended up happening, some other folks are videotaping this, and they came off the porch to say, "What's going on? You have no business talking, to her that way." And these people end up getting arrested for disorderly conduct and all kinds of stuff. That's what makes it bad in our community for any kind of good police relations. And so now, where are we today? We had protests all across this country. Protests is across the world, throughout the world, involving human rights issues with the United States and the treatment of its black citizens. And I know there's whites that don't want to hear me say this, and I'm running for Lucas County Sheriff. And when I seen this video, I even talked to the wife and I said, I'm so angry over this. I'm so disappointed. I am so embarrassed. I don't even run for sheriff. I don't want a badge. I've had a couple people, and one female officer in particular came to me and she said, "Earl, I started to walk in offices and turn my badge in. When is this going to stop? We're getting tired of this," and we are. And then whites look at us and say, "Why are you guys so upset?" Well, there's a lot of whites that's upset over this video as well. Now you really get to see the things we've been going through for decades and trying to stop. Oh, we talk about the protests, and then we talk about the looting, and the looting has got to stop. I totally disagree with that. I think police departments should address those things that are a detriment, that are a danger to our community, and looting just because someone won a protest as a byproduct of that protest is wrong. We're looking at now a funeral that's going to happen here in a day or so of a 77-year-old retired captain from St. Louis who was working as a security guard, and he was at a store that was being looted, and they're trying to stop the looters, and they shot and killed him. What sense does that make when you say, we're doing peaceful protests, and then some of the byproducts is those folks that want to take advantage of that. Those people that want to exploit the death of Mr. Floyd, exploit the peaceful protest, and do the things that they are doing out there that cause damage to what the protesters are trying to say. And when people say, "Well, look, we're protesting and we're mad as hell, and we have a right to loot because that's us expressing ourselves." Well, no, you don't. And people come and say, "Well, the stuff don't belong to us anyway." Well, I can't tell you how many of our businesses in our black African American community has suffered because of looting that now, and those are owned by blacks, that we can't even go to our own stores in our community because they've been damaged. There's stories that even our elderly or those people that have health conditions can't go to the pharmacy to pick up their medication because the pharmacies have been damaged, have been looted. And I can go on and on. And what is it about taking five flat screen TVs out of Target or what have? What does that have to do with us trying to better the relationships between community and police, in particular our black community and police? Nothing. And so my recommendation to the police department: you need to do your job, because that can't happen. And then look, we're dealing with this COVID-19 virus, and we're still at odds with that. And so now we're dealing with the loss of life of another black man. And what is going to happen with this country? What is going to happen with it? This cannot continue. And I'm hoping this time around, because there's so many people involved in this, so many people that's upset about it, both black, white, Hispanic, I mean, across all racial lines, that maybe this time we can do something about it. And my God, if you're looking at our protesters, and you know, that's protesting, and you have negative things to say about them because they're protesting, shame on you. Shame on you. Because protest has been part of this country since it's been since it's been created. Hell, people came to this country from England, from Britain, protesting. I mean, that's what the Boston Tea Party was all about. Taxation without no representation, that was a protest. So protest is part of our history, but without protest, we can't bring awareness to what's happening. And so protest is needed. But what I say to all of my African American black friends and family out there, keep protesting until we get an answer. Keep protesting until we get an answer. Until somebody looks at this and go, man, something's got to happen here. Because you can't just mistreat a segment of your population and think it's going to be okay, and it's not. So my recommendation to everybody, let's sit down and talk. Let's make sure we can work this whole problem out. If not, we're going to be lost as a nation. We're going to be lost as a nation. You cannot make it without black citizens, and vice versa. Black citizens can't make it without our white citizens, or non-African American or non-black citizens, period. We're all in this together. We really are. And I get so sick and tired of people saying, well, you know, my race has been through something too. You know, this race said, well, we've been through things, as though it diminishes what the black Americans in this country have been faced with. But I don't see anywhere in history, in this history of racism, where any other race was a sign was put out about any other race saying no, whatever allowed. There are signs that was out there saying no Negroes allowed, no colors allowed. I don't see any other race that had to deal with things like that. So that in itself should say something about the black race relations in this country and what we've had to go through all these years. So I wanted to come on and at least talk about that, because I am still hurting with so many people in this country over this latest death, and over looking at all the deaths, even prior to that, at the hands of our police officers. You got to do it better. You really do. Yeah, I know I can say a lot of things about our black community, and sometimes we need to look in the mirror at our own actions as well. But then dealing with that, and then have to deal with a continuation of police brutality, police murder of our black citizens. That's got to stop. And again, when we talk about training, we need to put all the money we can in training our officers and hiring the best of the best, and doing psychological testing as we hire these officers. We need to look at policy changes. You know, maybe it's time to take a look at it again, and maybe police officers that police a community need to live in that community. They need to live amongst the people that they are policing. There's a lot of things we need to look at to help better this relationship between us and police. I really praise Chief Crawl. As a matter of fact, he'll tell you, I sent him a message the other day just telling him I'm so proud of him. And so proud of police departments across the country that are starting to realize, man, we're all in this together. Your protest also is my voice as a police officer, because a lot of police officers didn't like what they saw. And so to see police officers walking with the protesters, talking with the protesters, breaking this barrier down, it's excellent. It's excellent. And I won't say that's the start. We started a long time ago. We have to continue this and grow it. We have to continue and grow it. So thank you, Chief Crawl, for what you've done out there. Mommy, and the other police officers that are involved in helping increase positive relationship within the community. One thing I will say to police officers, man, we have got to know this, and we have got to be extremely careful as well, because just getting off the turnpike, every time a police officer uses excessive force or brutality, and unfortunately sometimes that results in a death of a citizen, it makes it unsafe for our officers out there, because people are getting tired of this, and folks are taking matters in their own hands because they think that it can't get better because of the so much systematic of racism that's within our policing, as people think of the perception of that simply because of actions. It makes it dangerous for us all out there as police officers. If you remember back on, I believe it was July 12th, 2016, a black gentleman got so upset with so much police violence against black males until he went on the roof of a Dallas parking lot and he assassinated 5 police officers and wounded, I believe, 7 more. It wasn't so much he was looking at the individual, he was looking at the uniform. And so every time a police officer does something wrong out there to another citizen, it makes it a hazard for other police officers. And I remember in a training once when we talked about positive community policing, of how when you go to a domestic violence or some violence in the home, the way that police officer that went there first handled it, and if another crew have to go back, will determine how well the second crew survive any other encounter. Because if you make a citizen upset, if you don't handle the situation right, the next officer may bear the brunt of your misconduct or brutality or disrespect to people. I've seen where, and don't beat me up because the Highway Patrol is my big brother. I love the Highway Patrol. I've trained with them. I've worked together with the Highway Patrol, as I have done with other police departments around. And I do know for a fact, although they've had some issues, but not as much as I've seen in regular police departments, that when they approach a citizen, they approach a citizen with much respect, even if they're pulling a car over. When they walk up to the window, and I've been pulled over by troopers before, and they go, "Sir, I clocked you, or are you going X number of miles over the speed limit? Is there a problem or something?" And then they ask, "May I see your driver's license, registration, and proof of insurance?" And I've seen so many of local officers, though, community officers, when they talk to citizens, they don't give the citizens that kind of respect. You'll say, "Well, why'd you pull me over?" "I'll tell you in a minute, just give me your driver's license and proof." No, that citizen you need to answer that citizen's questions. I don't care what it is. Look, I have to say this. I remember a time in Toledo, I was working with an agent of mine out in the field. Her name was Michaela Luna. I'm sure she don't mind me mentioning her name. We were working in a parking lot at Deja Vu off of Burn over here. And At that time, we had such a wonderful relationship with the Toledo Police Department. They gave us a radio. We were either $8.99 or $7.99. I think at that particular time we were $7.99. When you hear $7.99 on the air, you know that was a liquor agent. And so we were working the parking lot over there because there were so many complaints of people consuming alcohol in a vehicle and so forth and so on. And we approached a vehicle, it was a Ford Excursion. We'll never forget this experience. And it had 4 black males in that excursion, and they were consuming beer. The driver was consuming a 40-ounce bottle, or consuming from a 40-ounce bottle of beer. And so when we approached that vehicle, we identified ourselves. As a matter of fact, we had on shirts that identified us as police on the outside because it was an open parking lot operation, so we didn't need to work undercover to do this. And so the gentleman that was sitting behind the steering wheel, I said, "Sir, I need to see your driver's license and registration. It's against the law to consume alcohol in a vehicle." And that would have been a minor citation, for consumption in a motor vehicle. And so he had one hand, he had his right hand on the steering wheel, and I could not see his left hand. And his beer now was sitting on the dashboard. So I asked him again. I said, "Sir, I need to see your driver's license, and I'm going to issue you a citation, and I'm going to let you go. And I need to have the beer that you're drinking from." He continued with his hands on his right hand on the steering wheel. I still couldn't see his left hand. He looked back at the other individuals in the vehicle, and when he did that, he looked back at me. And so I asked him again. I said, "Sir, I need to see your driver's license." And he looked back at his friends again. So then I asked him, I said, "Sir, I need to see both of your hands." He still had his right hand on the steering wheel, and his left hand, I still couldn't see it. And so at that time, when he refused to show me both his hands, he looked back at the other guys in the truck, and he says, "Tell my kids I love them." That's in really a shock, to my whole, how can I say, survival persona or psyche. And so at that time, I then took my revolver out, and I had it trained on him in that vehicle. And I said, "Sir, you need to show me both your hands, put both your hands on the steering wheel." And at that time, Michaela Luna was around on the right side of the vehicle, and she had her weapon out as well when she heard those commands of him. He still refused. He put his head down. He looked at me, and then he says, "I have a gun in my left hand." And what I said at that time is that I need you to bring that weapon up with 2 fingers on the butt of that gun and bring it up very slowly. That incident was resolved. We hit a button that's on the radio. The dispatcher already knew where we were. She or he then sent backup units headed that way, code 3, because they knew that we were in trouble. And when police officers arrived, they were able to pull everybody out of the vehicle safely. We were able to retrieve the firearm. And what was told to me at the time, "Hey, son, you leaving?" Okay. I'll see you at the house. Okay. That was my really large son, which I fear for his safety all the time out here, involving if he ever gets stopped. But anyway, to make the long story short, I was told by a police officer, a friend of mine, that if that had been him, he would have lit that truck up, because the guy wasn't showing his hand, and you'd have been justified in doing it, Earl, because it posed a danger to you. And I've had police officers said, "I don't know if I'd have waited that long. If the man refused to show me his hands, my life is in danger." And it was. I felt my life was in danger. But I always tell police officers, you may be legally right in pulling that trigger, but were you morally right? That's something to think about. I'm sure there'll be some disagreements out there for sure. But I am alive today, and that gentleman is alive today as well. What it was, he didn't want to go back to prison. He was on parole from prison. Parole. And what he told me once we got him out in handcuffs, he said, I just didn't want to go back to prison. And I'm sure that violated his parole. And what I said to that gentleman is that I truly thank you for not doing what you had in your mind to do. Because he had in his mind to pull that trigger. And I don't know if I would be here today if he had carried that out, talking with you. I don't know. I don't know if he would be here today if he had carried out his actions. So yes, liquor agents do go through a lot of stuff as well as like other police officers. But however, we have got to increase the relationship between the black community and our police officers. And again, remember what I said earlier. It's not about having more black police officers in the community, hiring more black police officers, because on this incident, one of the officers was black that assisted in taking Mr. Floyd's life. There's been other black officers around the country, we don't talk about this much, that have taken the life of blacks as well. And so when you talk about trainings and things, we need to first try to get this relationship where we are liking each other. I like to see those things where I'm driving down the street, whether it's the inner city or wherever, and there's a police officer in uniform shooting hoops with the children. There's a police officer in the community that's taking children shopping, because we don't see them positive images much. One of the things with me, as a young child, I learned to dislike police because my father, Earl Mack Sr., he had a nervous breakdown when I was 7 years old. We lived in the Port Lawrence Homes, number 60 Port Lawrence Homes. He had a nervous breakdown. At that time, when police officers came, police officers had wagons and they would take you to the hospital or wherever. Well, I seen them wrestling with my father. They wrestled him to the ground. They were putting handcuffs on him. They were doing all they can to get him under control, because my father, he had a mental breakdown and he was going off. And so when he was taken to the hospital, he was then sometimes it just bothers me to even think about this, but he was taken to Lima State Hospital for the criminally insane. And I always blame police officers for that, not knowing the condition of my father and what really happened. Until as my father started getting better, he was shipped back to Toledo, to the Toledo State Hospital, where I was able to go visit him. And a couple of police officers really helped me get through this as I grew older. One of them was Marshal Swan, and his dad way back then. I got to know that family, and he knew my father as well. Matter of fact, Marshal Swan and my father played ping pong together. They were on a ping pong team, and he really helped me get through that period of time of disliking police officers. And obviously it turned me around, because I became a cop years after that. First worked for the University of Toledo as a police officer, was hired, and then went from there to the Ohio Department of Liquor Control as an enforcement agent, and then from there to the Ohio Department of Public Safety that took over all the liquor enforcement operations, and under their umbrella, we rose through the ranks of field supervisor, of agent in charge, or assistant agent in charge first, of agent in charge all the way to acting deputy director of enforcement operations, to then being appointed the deputy director of Ohio Homeland Security, which came with a lot of other responsibilities. But relationships are very important. And again, training. If we get anything out of these relationships, we need to do better training of our officers. We need to involve the community in those trainings. I believe community should, somebody from the community should be at every training session. Not that you have to be there every day, but walk in and introduce yourself and talk to those young cadets. I believe that from time to time, the community, somebody in the community, a leader in the community should be able to go to a roll call of police officers. We've been denied going to roll calls. We've been denied going to those, police training sessions. As a matter of fact, a few years ago, when we talked with our mayor Wade, is that he came to a couple of those meetings, and we came up with some resolutions to some things, and that was what we talked about. We talked about allowing some community leaders to come to train and see how officers are being trained, to introduce ourselves, and then we also talked about community leaders going to a roll call or two and getting to know those community leaders, so that if something happened out there in the street, that they would be able to respond, and the officer would know who this community leader is that could help resolve some of the issues. All that was denied. Now here lately, because of all the protests here in Toledo, that's being reconsidered again. But that needs to happen. As I said earlier, police officers work for the citizens, and so everything you have, from that police department to the equipment you have, to the car you drive, to the uniform you wear, to the firearms you carry on you, to other tools that you carry, belong to the citizens. They paid for it. And so to deny citizens, requests to come meet their officers, while actually, involved in roll call, while actually involved in training, I think is not right. We need to know, or citizens need to know, those things that they want to know about how their dollars are being spent. So that's some of the issues I would like to see covered. And everything that I said. I know I was probably all over the board, but again, I still carry those emotions from watching that video. I don't know what's going to happen. I'm hoping that we be able to finally resolve this, get some real dialogue going on amongst police officers and the African American community. I am so glad to be I'm a junior, as I call myself, Rotarian. I belong to the Rotary Club of Toledo. Joined them a few months ago, and I am so proud of what I see there. There is some genuine concern about our relationship between police and the African American Black community. And a matter of fact, I just done an interview involving that and giving some recommendations as to what the Rotary could do, because our Rotary in Toledo is the 10th largest in the world. We have a lot of business leaders, business owners that are members of this Rotary Club. Man, there's a lot of skill sets there, and I talked about that. That can help resolve. There's a lot of influence there as well. They have an influence, into state government, local government, and all over the place. So that kind of influence, we need to help push things forward to help resolve things. And I think the Rotary Club is quite serious about helping, those measures as well. So wherever we can find anyone that want to help resolve this issue, to better the relationship between the African American Black community and police, it needs to happen, because we're all in this together. What affects that Black community affects all communities, and you see that now. So those that are protesting, hey, I know this is a long video. Sorry about that, but I commend you. Excuse me. I commend you for stepping up to the plate, because a lot of folks will sit back behind those walls and complain. A lot of folks will say, well, I just can't do that. But our young folks are out there showing us what should be happening. And if you remember some of the protests during the 50s and 60s, it was our young people marching in the streets. And that's what's happening today as well. We just have to make sure we march smarter, and that we do those things that we need to do that will increase positive relationships between community and police. And I also say this too, and that's the reason why I'm running for Lucas County Sheriff. If you're willing to criticize something, if you're willing to talk about the police officer's conduct, then be willing to step up to the plate, to really work inside to do those things to make change. Lip service is over. We have on our Buffalo Soldier patch, it says deeds and not words. Deeds, not words. And so if you're willing to do all that criticizing of police officers, then step up to the plate and educate yourself and become a police officer so that you can help make the changes inside. It's hard to make changes outside. We hear you talking. We see your protests. It gets attention, but what are you really doing to help inside? And we have a lot of criminal justice majors out there that are African American, Black students. Then step up to the plate and really do something, to help your community by becoming part of those agencies that you talk about all the time. And we can really make change. We can really make change that will last forever, and get rid of some of the systemic problems of racism that we see in law enforcement. So I'm done with this for now. You'll probably hear me come back again one day. I think this went almost an hour. Look at some of the segments. If you don't like them, that's okay. If you like some of them, let us know. I would like to hear from you, whether you like it or not. It doesn't make a difference. As long as we got some dialogue going, there's hope for us all. Thank you.